Okay, so it's time for another one of these, another Orc Fodder Gauntlet, and this time, because I've been looking at the Elven faction's balance with regards to the latest patch, what better unit to use as the next subject than the Smiths of Eregion. Very, very elite unit this. I've got pretty high hopes for them. As with every Elven unit, they do run the slight risk of being overwhelmed eventually. But having said that, the Smiths are so good that they might just be able to weather the storm. We shall see. But the High Elves, and all the Elven factions in general, certainly the Galadrim as well, will have their unit amounts increased by 10 men per unit, at least for like the more standard units. So for example, the Elder Enway Swordsman, oh my, look at that lag. That is quite crunchy. Regardless, the Eldar Enway Swordsman will have around 100 men now, the Storm Raiders will have closer to 75, that sort of thing. So the High Elves are now a little bit more viable, I think, to play. In a field they will still struggle a little bit just because of their focus, but I think that's fine. I think, you know, provided that they are at least decent to play and not hopelessly at a disadvantage against most cavalry-based factions, I think I'm happy with that. Because the elves do have a certain advantage on a defensive siege as it is, so being good at different things is fine. And the Smiths in particular, their stats are not dissimilar to the Mithril Guard, and they were the ones that were able to very easily mop up the Orc Fodder. Really the major difference between the two is the mass that the dwarves bring, and that might be key, might be enough to push the Orc Fodder back more, but I think the Smiths should at least be getting a victory. Get the next wave in. I feel like they should certainly be doing better than the Dalian Paladins at this. I'd be surprised if they didn't anyway. One of the OG units, the Smiths, they were always really good. I did always find the Smiths in original though to be, you know, they were easily the most expensive infantry unit, and that was really a problem with the High Elves in general. My complaints about the High Elves back then are ironically the complaints I had about the High Elves more recently in this one as well, but still, the High Elves are always going to be a faction that focuses on their quality, and I don't have a problem with that. It's just the way the game works, you do need to have a balanced army, now more than ever. There's a rout. I think we'll make a little cut here. Just because I want to see how long they can keep their full unit for. So we'll go another 2 waves and then we'll see what's going on then. So we have lost 3 elves, which doesn't bode too well if I'm honest, but nonetheless we'll see. They, you know, I have been wrong before. The units have lasted longer than I thought after losing men, so. But still, I did expect them to hold on to their full unit strength a little longer than this. Especially losing 3 in quick succession there in the last wave, that was a little odd. The High Elf balance in general though, seeing as that's been one of my main focuses with regards to looking at balance lately, I do kind of like the direction they're going in, because they are quite different to the other 2 Elven factions. Like, what on earth are they doing now? Of course, they're a little bit more focused around their armour and a little bit more focused around their infantry and how strong they are and how rigid they are. Also, however, the High Elves do have a surprisingly good archer force to a point. I'd say that if you're looking at the archer forces overall, the Woodland Realms and the Galadrim have both got stronger overall selections of archers, but if you use the Noldor Elders and the Elder Enway Archers, you have a good archer force that can be good against armour. So, while you may have a smaller archer force that's effective, you will be able to pinpoint more important enemy units and take them out. And this will then give your infantry a little bit more breathing space, because your infantry is going to deal with lower tier units like this Orc Fodder much more easily. Having said that, we have lost 6 men at this point, and we're only a few waves in, so that's a little bit unfortunate for the Smiths. For a unit that has similar stats to the mighty Mithril Guard, they are certainly not proving their worth in the same way at the same thing. Next wave. I wonder what is different. I should really look into some of the more hidden stats. Like, I know that the mass as the Mithril Guard is higher, and that could have a significant impact, but also I'm wondering, like, melee expertise? Like, usually that's something that comes into effect when you're talking about hidden stats and why a unit is better. Like, the Sons of Argonath are a good example of that. They clearly have more melee expertise than the Harbingers of Castamere, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten above them on the shock infantry list, but I can't imagine the Smiths would be a lower expertise unit than some of the heavy infantry that they are around. But maybe I'm wrong. Again, most of this heavy infantry works better when it's in shield wall, but the Mithril Guard was able to tank out the entire Orc fodder line. So I saw no reason why the Smiths couldn't at least try and do that, but it seems like I might be wrong on that respect. I still expect them to do very well, but victory might be a little bit too far out of their grasp with how many they've lost already. A lot of them are bloodied up as well. There are a few of them that haven't been touched, but a lot of them are bloodied. The Falas Lords as well, like if you talk about an Elven unit which can hold and just is very survivable, you might be better off going for the Falas Lords if these guys aren't a hugely impressive unit in this sort of situation, because obviously on the defense they've got more hit points. They're also spears, and spears will be buffed soon to have a little bit more mass when they're in formation, so Cav can't crunch through them. At that point I would say that the Smiths are not worth it over the Falas Lords. I mean, we'll have to wait and see how far these guys actually get in comparison. If they get twice as many kills, then maybe I would change my mind about that, but so far it's looking like the Smiths might be a little bit underwhelming here. Hard to say. They tend to lose their soldiers in clumps. Overall though, I will say that the Elven balance is going to be better now that they've been given a few more men per unit. Particularly in stuff like the Elder Swordsmen and the Storm Raiders, because it gives them a nice damaging core. And it means that you can't just charge in and overwhelm them anymore, because, you know, more men means that they're going to be able to hold out for longer. The High Elves are also very fast on foot, so they're going to be able to outposition you if you just charge blindly in, and that's never a good thing. The Elves are a very, very strong force if you get them 1v1, and they really do prove that in a defensive siege. In an offensive siege, I think the Elves will always struggle with the way the balance is intended to work, though. The arrow towers being what they are, they're significantly stronger now, and the Elves are the ones that suffer most from that, because you can't afford to lose many unit models as the Elves, because you don't have as many, and it can really damage your attempts. You're going to have to take a very, very patient approach as the Elves if you're going to take them on an offensive siege. At least a standard offensive siege. Obviously on a map like Edoras or Osgiliath or several of these scenarios, you'll be just fine with the Elves, but in a standard one with arrow towers, it's going to be tricky. The High Elves may be a little bit better in that regard, because they do have, a lot of their units are decently armoured, but particularly the Wooden Realms and the Galadrim, not going to perform too well there. Anyway, I think we'll make another cut soon, so that we can see how they're doing at the halfway mark, seeing if they've managed to hold on. Oh, there goes another one. See if they managed to hold on to over 3/4 of their men. Well, here we are at about the halfway point, and 35 men, so they've already significantly underperformed next to the Mithril Guard, who at this point, with this many casualties, had finished. In fact, I think less than this amount of casualties in terms of percentages. So, at this point, the question I'm asking is, will the Smiths of Eregion even place on the top 5 that we keep track of? Of course, I did remove the Arthedain swords because they technically don't exist anymore. They are now dismounted Arthedain Knights, which are altogether a very different kind of unit. They are more of a standard shock infantry as opposed to one of the super powered ones. But the Smiths, I was expecting a little bit more from them, if I'm honest. They certainly do perform well in most situations. Their armor-piercing weapons are a little bit wasted on this kind of unit, of course, but even so, the Mithril Guard had armor-piercing axes as well. They are able to clear up these units pretty quickly, but they themselves are taking too many casualties to sustain this level of performance. Let me see. Just get my notes and we'll see what the amount of kills they need to get is. I believe it was the Helmhammers that were in 5th after the removal of the Arthur Dane swords. Yes, it was. So they need to get 2,331. And they need to get through at least a couple more waves if they're going to do that. They might do it, but they are losing men at a pretty decent rate at this point. It would be rather embarrassing though if the best High Elf Sword and Board unit was not able to match up to Rohan's. Rohan in general, the Helmhammers, how good they are is kind of weird, because if that's the case, that means they have a better Sword and Board unit than the High Elves. At least in this situation. I mean, the Smiths of Eregion are probably better in a couple of other ways, like they do have more defense, so in a choke point shield wall they probably will perform better, but it's not really arguable that Rohan have got a better Sword and Board unit than Gondor, and shields are really, well, shielded units are really the focus of Gondor as a faction, so kind of strange. I would expect a buff for the Wardens of the White Tower at some point in the future, just to bring some sort of sense to that. But then again, Gondor do have a surprisingly good shock infantry, whereas Rohan didn't have one in the top 10, so I don't know. I guess it's just weirdness. Units of exceptional talent that manage to break the mould of their factions, that's not a bad thing, I suppose. Meanwhile, the Smiths, just about clinging on to over 30 men. Next wave, please. Well, as it turns out, that didn't take very long. Only until the end of this wave, essentially. 25, and only half the enemy force remains. How many men do they have left? Well, the percentages are very even. They've got 58% of their unit is dead, though. Again, they've proven themselves to be pretty good at hanging on in there, I suppose, but I still don't see how they'll win. At the rate they've been losing men, and eventually, of course, that crunch will come. Maybe they shall surprise me, though. It still is odd to me, though, that they are doing worse than the Dalian Paladins at this. I guess mass really does play an important part in mopping up trash in this manner. Of course, the Dalian Paladins do have a decent amount of mass to them. Very thick armour, incredibly slow though. Dale are a good faction actually. I find them quite fun to play in this version of Reforged, with their very, very good archer force. They've got half decent cavalry. The Earls are very, very good. The rest of their cav is maybe not so good, but it doesn't really matter. Archers, of course, are their focus. They've got decent infantry in places. I do like the balance of Dale. I suppose the Dragon Slayers could be a bit annoying, but then everyone needs tools to deal with high-profile units, and that is Dale's. Meanwhile, the Smiths are starting to lose more and more men. It's going to be close. To think that the finest High Elven infantry would be felled by orc fodder. Just an endless stream of it. Again, this obviously isn't a real battle situation, so I can't judge them too harshly. But this does at least show their ability to mop up continuous amounts of trash. And it's something that obviously the dwarves are able to do with impunity. I was surprised the Dale Paladins managed to do it, to be honest. But they did. I thought that the Blackback Berserkers would be good, and they were. It was just their overall lack of survivability which did cost them in the end, but they were still a very impressive unit. The Smiths, though... I was expecting a victory here, if I'm honest, and I suppose it's not impossible that they could pull it off, but it's unlikely at this point with how many waves they've got to go through. 20 left. And here comes the next wave. I don't know if they'll make it through the next wave. If not, then the wave after, I imagine, will certainly be where they are foiled. They can't afford to lose much more before they start becoming like surrounded and entrapped, and when that happens, it's basically the end. They're also not able to really finish off the wave previous now with the amount of damage they're able to dish out. Oof. These orc fodder. They're still no match for the hammers in a 1v1 though. Pokey pokey. The smiths are also becoming a little stretched now. They're a little all over the place, which will allow the orcs to get in between the gaps and isolate them. So this might be the end. If not this wave, then definitely the next wave. Victory still seems certain for them. They really are extending their life here. Oh, parried by Orc Fodder. How embarrassing. Oh, he's dead. Don't know what Denethor was worried about. The Mordor army was only made of these guys. Minas Tirith never stood a chance of falling. Oof. Mordor have got some interesting stuff though, speaking of their army. The Lesser Balrog is very, very expensive, but devastating if you can use it right. It's obviously not something you can just send in on its own and expect it to win, but if you support it properly, it can utterly destroy the enemy front line. Like I would say, if you supported it with some nice Moranon Baruks, then you're sorted for that. They're going to be doing a large amount of damage. And really though, one of my favourite units from Mordor is of course the Temple Inquisitors. I wasn't expecting them to be the best shock unit, but by the measures which I could, well, by what I could measure, I couldn't see any reason to not make them the best one, and making them the centre of your Mordor infantry is a very, very good idea, I think, because the damage they can dish out over a period of time, particularly when they're in amongst the fodder, or at least the less elite units, like again, Moranon Uruks or Halberds, they're going to be able to get a lot of damage done throughout the battle, and they're going to be difficult to kill off. The cav charge is really the most effective way to deal with some of the nastier shock infantry. But again, Mordor have got tools to deal with cavalry, primarily trolls. And halberds aren't particularly great at dealing with cav, but if you can entrap them, they're not bad. Most good cav is of course heavily armoured. I do think that when spears have their greater mass and they're able to stand up the cav charges a little better, it will be better. Oh my, look, we saw one of them die. Sliced in the back by a big, well, by a sort of makeshift orc axe. But yes, I do think that Mordor will be a real force to be reckoned with. I'm not sure they're the strongest orc faction though, honestly. There's a lot of pros and cons to every orc faction. The Misty Mountains are very strong. Gundabad are very strong. Isengard are strong and balanced. It's difficult to pick a strongest out of the three. Mordor have probably got the weakest sort of frontal infantry, but they have the strongest high-end stuff, which, you know, provided you use that correctly, you could say that Mordor are the strongest orc faction. Don't know if I'd go as far to say that they're the strongest evil faction. The orc fodder charges. Let's see if we can't speed this up a little bit. It's still hanging on in there. I'll deploy this unit a little earlier if they're still alive. Just because well, it doesn't seem like it's going to matter too much. I'll deploy this unit at 100 remaining to make up for the previous one. They're going to lose here anyway. This is going to be it, only 6 remaining, so victory will not be theirs.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Indeed. Smash the enemy after what we like to call acceptable losses in Mordor. Just 3 remaining. The banner carriers once again seem to be the ones propping the army up. Those are pretty big swords to be wielding one-handed. They're hanging on in there. Not getting many kills, they're stun locked, but not going down without a fight. Man, he is not dying. And there we go. 2,780, so they did do better than I gave them credit for, to be fair. They managed to hold off for longer despite losing unit models early. They did manage to overcome the Blackback Berserkers, but they did not get victory, as opposed to the Dale Paladins and the Mithril Guard. So that's the Smiths. I'd say they're just about worth it for that, like over the Phalaster Lords. The Phalaster Lords, of course, got a considerable amount less, as spears, but they are a little bit more survivable in formation. But these guys, a little bit more all-purpose, and against armoured units, of course, they will do the business. So, yeah, a decent performance. Maybe not exceptional. I was expecting them to squeak out a victory, looking at their stats, but even so, I think that the High Elves in general have been improved, and the Smiths are a pretty good centre to that army, particularly if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more bold, because of course the Phalas Lords will not be particularly good at that. And one of those two units is likely to be a good General's Bodyguard. Although I would say that the High Elves do have a better General's Bodyguard, but it is an archer unit, so that sort of thing is probably not the best test for this, but they will probably show, well, they will definitely show up on the top 10 archer lists, I can tell you that much, which will probably be the next top 10, so I don't know when that will be out though, because the archers will probably take quite a while to test, because trying to get the AI to do what I want with the archers is a real nightmare, but we'll see, and hopefully there'll be a few more battles, bit bigger scale. I was hoping to do a couple of sieges on the likes of Edoras, Andros, maybe a few scenarios as well if possible, but for the time being I actually have a slightly different version to most other people because I'm trying to help with a bit of the testing anyway, so I hope you enjoyed and I hope that you will join me for whatever's next.